my goal is just to sort of tell you, as best I can, sort of reflect on what happened and how I went from atheism to Christianity. I'm a kind of a skeptic that we can do this very reliably. So I'm not convinced that I can reflect accurately enough on what really tipped the scales or what changed me or why. And I have no burden. I feel no burden whatsoever to sort of give a full accounting that I'm not even convinced I myself understand. So I find it very hard to reflect on my own sort of thinking. And just as I was driving over here today, I just thought, okay, what am I going to say? What are the kind of things I would highlight? So my background was my parents were divorced when I was very young, and my dad's side was more religious and my mom's side really wasn't. Scandinavian Lutheran, my mom's side was mostly irreligious, and my dad's side was more like devout Catholic. And then I lived pretty much with my mom's side and was irreligious. My dad would try and drag us to church, whenever we were with him. But I despised it. And, I remember in middle school, in some type of a Sunday school class I was dragged to, that I was like challenging the teacher, we don't even know God exists and stuff, and I was like in fifth grade, I think. It was quite young. And so I didn't really participate, and my siblings kind of pretended they believed for a while, to keep parents happy, but I was not interested in that. So I was very argumentative through high school and I went to the Air Force Academy, and so that's at least the upbringing. I don't want to go in forever to that, other than I really did say all the time to people I was an atheist. I didn't believe these things. But you have to remember, in the late 1980s, to say you're an atheist, to say you don't believe in God, there's no YouTube, there's no... I knew very little about atheism. I knew nothing about the arguments for God or anything like that. It was purely just experiential, practical.
Did you use the label atheist?
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, I knew of atheism.
So your exposure to it was more through like stereotypes and people.
I'm sure it was off of TV and PBS or
right,
encyclopedias, that kind of stuff. It wasn't like I didn't know what atheism was. It was more just I just knew I didn't believe in God, and I think I was probably more like anti-religion than like a worked out atheism, if that makes sense. And so I'm not trying to pretend, like I was, some really well thought out atheist.
And I'm not trying to know true Scots on you.
Was that?
I'm not trying to use the no true Scots on fallacy.
Oh, okay. Nice. And I was more of a math student as well. I went to the Air Force Academy. I was more of like an engineer kind of mind. And then I'll go into the details more, but I ended up having a roommate who was a Christian, and I did, like, you would get inspections, at the academy, and if you got a bunch of demerits for things you didn't do, like in your room, you would then lose your weekend privileges, which were gold. And so I did a fake one of these. I stole one, and I did a fake one and set up my roommate, so he came in thinking he got like 20 demerits and he was not going to be able, and he had his family actually in Colorado Springs, so he was just so distraught that he was not going to be able to go home. And so I let it go for like an hour or so, and then and he was, keep in mind, he was very sort of energetic, passionate Christian, and I knew it, and so I was a little bit salty that I had to room with this guy. And so anyway, I did this to him more to have fun, but he was so crushed that I felt like so guilty that I had done this to him, and I mean super guilty. So it was like the first moment of serious guilt in my life, even though it didn't like damage him that much. He got to go home. But anyway, so he asked me if I would go to this Bible study with him, and I was sort of out of guilt. I was like, sure. So I went and met some interesting people and tried to be nice, I didn't want to be like who I really was too much, but he knew, so I was very skeptical. I listened to these people, but I met a lot of nice people, I will say, and there were a lot of girls there, and good food. And did I mention I was at the Air Force Academy? So it was like, it wasn't the worst way to spend a Saturday night. So I went back again. I went back a few times, and I was kind of like, eh. And of course, people were like, so, have you read the Bible? And I never read it. So I felt a little embarrassed that I hadn't read anything from the Bible. And I knew like nothing other than just the generic stuff, And I was like, okay. So I felt like I should read it. And I started reading it and thought, this is all dumb, I've read Genesis, and my roommate's like, so what do you think? And I was like, it's like Star Wars. Which, by the way, I went to the original Star Wars in a theater. In a theater. That's how old I am. So, one of my claims to fame. So that was just enough to there was just enough to make me interested. There were a few people there that were pretty smart. And I could see it, that they were smart people. And I would ask them questions, what do they think of this, evolution, whatever, Bible stuff. And it was starting to be a little bit more honest about how skeptical I was. And so.
I don't want to interrupt the flow, but so, in addition to your roommate and this Bible stuff,
yep.
what was the my take with the military is that there can be some real pockets of religiosity. Did you go to chapel and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, there were chaplains there. If you were interested in religion or Christianity, like there were options for you if you really were interested. And I was aware of it.
It wasn't required though. You didn't have to go on Sunday morning.
No, I knew the coach of the football team. I was played football. That's how I got there. And I knew that the coach was a Christian. By the way, he, gave the little whatever David and Goliath speeches before games and stuff. But I was not interested. It was just there. So anyway, I ended up going to his church, which was weird. It wasn't like a church with a pastor. They didn't really have a pastor. They just had a few people that led it. It wasn't prescripted very much. So they read the Bible, they read some passages, they sang, people got up and shared stuff out of the Bible. And it was like, having been Catholic when I was really young, it was just like, what the heck? It was just completely different from anything I had seen. And actually, because some of the people I had met were clearly pretty smart, one guy was a physicist and stuff, I was like, these people aren't idiots, I could tell. And it didn't feel cultish because they're not doing anything cultish, other than singing and reading, and they talked very specifically about what was written. I was like, well, these people aren't dumb. And so it kind of interested me a little bit. And plus it was I got to get off, out of the academy. Anyway, so I converted in there. I'll go back to that. But I did convert after about a half a year of doing that, right before I left. And my friends thought I had just literally lost my ever living mind. When I went back to Minnesota, where I was from, as well as my family. Everybody just didn't believe that I was a Christian now. And then I ended up just studying classics because I felt like I didn't know anything. I wasn't interested in education at all, even though I was mathematically inclined. I could do math effortlessly without much work. But I didn't know anything about history or literature, never read books. And so I was like, I don't know anything, so what do you do? I met a guy and I was like, what do you study if you don't know anything about the world? And he said, you should study classics. Because it's the Greeks and Romans, and you sort of get the foundations of the modern, at least the Western world. And so that was it. I started learning Greek and Latin, and I was reading Plato and all these guys. And it worked. One of the attractions is that the Bible was written in Greek. So I was like, oh, hey, I can apply some of this because people are saying once in a while, they'll be like, oh, the Greek word here means this. So that's what I was doing at the time, just studying classics. And that's sort of like, I could jump, let me just kind of jump way ahead and then I'll go back. I was in education, mainly college preparatory school world, as an administrator for a number of years, 20 years. And then went and started teaching at the university, and I'm actually working on a dissertation on the narrative criticism of the Gospel of John. It's an academic degree from Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. But so I'm doing that. So I've done quite a bit of stuff, obviously, over the years. But I worked for a while staging debates. I don't know if I told you this, but I worked with a group for 3 or 4 years off and on. And it was like truth was in the service of winning a debate rather than like if you really want to know the truth. But people are coming because they're actually wanting to know, like they want to progress. And I just thought, I just didn't like the dissonance of it. So I started iPub because I was like, I just want to have conversations with people. Like, I'm interested, and I feel like I can't speak for all sides. I don't claim to know everybody's side, perspective, but I truly didn't believe in God, and now I do, and have for many decades. And but I vividly remember, what it was like, and I have existential moments where I'm like, maybe I'm wrong, and I have that flood-in feeling of what it was like to not believe in God, and I will ponder it, and and then I move, never really go back to it, but it's not like I can't think like that, if that's the way to say it. Just like if anybody, which is probably most of you, had any kind of religious upbringing or Christian upbringing, that perspective too. You know what that was like. It's not like you've forgotten what that was like. So anyway, the goal was to have meaningful conversations with iPub, which is kind of what I'm doing. And my sort of view about conversations is that the value of it is that it really does affect our thinking. Like, my conversation with Bob, it affected my thinking. It got me thinking about a few things. We still have things to follow up on. I'm sure he'll jump in tonight. And I find that really helpful, very challenging, very good for me. I started that back when I was in classics because I took a lot of Greek philosophy, and I just really like that. But I'm a realist as far as, like, I don't think of this as like, I'm here to, I'll get a conversion or two out of it. Because there's such an existential inertia, or maybe such a gravity to your worldview, to your core fundamental outlook on reality, that we just don't switch back and forth every month. It's totally unrealistic to think we're going to do that. Nobody does that. Wherever you are, you get an inertia there, and you ride that train for a long time. You're probably not going to have more than one or two big total worldview changes, if that, in your entire lifetime. Most people don't. So anyway, I hope you just understand that's sort of where I'm coming from. So I see this as more like an education that helps you think of what my experience was, and I can listen to you, and you can listen to me. All right. So some assumptions that I'll kind of go back to what were the things that were going on during that 6-month period, whatever year. It actually stretched out for probably a year and a half or two. Where I was a Christian, but I still very much felt like I could go back. It felt very much like I was free to go back. I still felt that, especially when I left Colorado and went back home.
The inertia hadn't built up.
It hadn't built up. That's right. The train was still not that deep. And although I have to say I never really seriously considered going back, but I felt like I could.
You were majoring in what in Colorado?
I was at the Air Force Academy just doing engineering. And then I left before I graduated. So I left and went back to the University of Minnesota.
Okay.
And then eventually
went in. Switched to classics.
Switched to classics, and then eventually went to New York to Columbia University, which has been in the news in the last 6 months. So some assumptions. These are just some assumptions, right? That kind of frame the way I'm sure I'm going to talk about it, and you don't have to agree with these. I'm just telling you I think these are the way I will view it, and they might help you think about it, or as you listen to me. One is that I feel like we all live with some kind of horizon line. Like, I don't think it's possible as a human to live without a horizon line because it's too disorienting. So, and that horizon line is at least loosely comprised of a set of beliefs about ultimate reality, as coherent as they can be, as coherent as they can be. Now you can modify that. It doesn't bother me at all. I'm just saying most people don't live with in complete chaos, which is the opposite of a horizon line. Oh, you understand what I mean by horizon line? It orients you so you don't have vertigo. So we don't like to live in just complete skepticism. Arcesilaus, the Greek philosopher, said nothing is certain. Not even that. So
My relatives might shock you a little bit.
it could. I'm not saying nobody has done it or nobody tried. I mean, Diogenes, of course, was greatly respected for his skepticism.
My relatives are not respected.
Oh, okay. They're not going to be Diogenes then. Well, he walked around naked,
Sure.
sleeping wherever he wanted. Yeah. There's a lot of nakedness in ancient Greece. But But my point is that it's there's an existential crisis or dissonance or whatever if you don't have some kind of a horizon line. And by horizon line, I just mean something that orients the real world choices you make in life. You're going to make choices every day, hundreds of choices, and they'll be informed by some type of something bigger that sort of orients your life on some plane. And again, whatever that whatever gyroscope you're using, I'm just saying it's there. Now, Drew and I go back. My podcast partner is Drew, and we go back and forth on this all the time. This sort of an idea, and it's one of our big comeback. Like we come back to this idea a lot. So, and my view is that the horizon line beliefs are not demonstrable scientifically. That's not to say scientific conclusions don't influence our big beliefs. For sure, they do. It's very, very bad if you don't let scientific findings influence your big beliefs. I think that'd be a big mistake. But I'm just saying I don't think ultimately they're demonstrable. You can only have stronger or weaker philosophical warrant for these kinds of beliefs about ultimate things. But again, that can be a thing you come back to me on. I'm just telling you this is the way I would sort of think of it. And does not bother me the least if you just say, I don't agree with that. Science versus philosophy. So, like I said, I think it's really, I never see, we should ever think, I'm resistant to whatever science is discovering. I never feel that way. Certainly in the classical tradition, that was not the case. Even the scientific revolution and so on is obviously you should follow science to wherever it leads. And that does create tension for religion. There's no question. I don't think we should stick our heads in the sand over that. But I do still think philosophy is really important, and that's I'm not a philosopher. I'm just saying I do think that's another part of understanding reality. I don't think we can understand reality purely scientifically or purely philosophically. And then my idea of God would be the classical theistic. You guys talk about classical theism at all? Are you familiar with this idea? Okay, so I just find that's easier because it's God, capital G, that transcends different religions and stuff, and of course taps into Aristotle, Plato's, those guys. And then what else is there? Oh, the sensus divinitatis. Are you familiar with this? The sensus divinitatis. You don't know the Latin?
A little bit.
What? It just means a sense of divinity. It's basically the Bible, the book of Ecclesiastes. God has set eternity in their hearts, and the idea is, Alvin Plantinga, the philosopher, the Christian philosopher, has sort of popularized it in the modern period in the world of philosophy, though it's been around for a long, long time. But it's the idea that we have a sixth faculty to perceive God directly that doesn't rely upon inference. It doesn't rely upon inference, which is the normal way people are going to argue for the existence of God.
Is that his a proper functionalist view, in regard to that?
I have no idea what proper functionalism is.
It's it's essentially that God created us in a sense to understand truth or know truth.
Yeah. I get proper functionalist now. Yeah. It's certainly related. It's inextricable, right? Yeah. And it's basically the premise that if God exists, then, but he also probably bases it on. I don't even know. I've read him on it, but it's been so long.
Yeah.
That,
he has his ontological argument that he argues.
Yeah. It's very interesting. He goes to the Anselm argument. You kind of revived it, even though supposedly Kant killed it. But it goes back to well before the Reformers and so on. But it's just the idea that for the believer, many of the believers I will claim, that there's a direct perception of God. Like I would say, if by analogy, that my wife's presence is transcends just the five senses. It's mediated through the five senses. It's not like if she snuck up behind me, I would know she was there per se, But that there's something to her presence that's different from just that she speaks with her voice or whatever. It's something we experience. And I'm not claiming that's anything not scientific, her presence, you understand. I'm only saying it by analogy. That the claim of the sensus divinitatis is that you directly perceive God. But of course, in the classical theistic sense, God is not corporeal. God is not got a voice or whatever. So
right.
You don't.
I would immediately push back on
yeah.
that, just because your wife exists. I would resist that analogy and caution you on that analogy just because.
Yeah.
I don't think it holds up.
You mean the analogy doesn't?
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, all...
Because you're making a claim,
Yeah.
and you're trying to support the claim with this analogy, but I'm saying the analogy.
No. I was trying to be really clear
Okay.
that it's not the same thing. It's an analogy is just an attempt. I mean, I do not think, just for clarity, I do not think an analogy strengthens the case for a sensus divinitatis at all. There's only one thing that
So
strengthens
what's
the
better
case.
evidence, though? Yeah, if you're making a claim.
There's only
that's-
one, just like there's only one thing that would validate it, and it's the experience of it, because it's like direct perception. Yeah, it's like a direct perception. So the only way for me to like defend that I directly perceive the podium over there is in my own like internal experience. There's no external validation of it. It's just a direct perception. So I'm not trying to convince you of it. I was trying to give you some assumptions that inform my thinking that inevitably will spill out at some point, that if I don't say it clearly at the beginning.
Another
Yeah.
perspective on the wife thing, and I don't know if I'm going to say this correctly because I just thought of it. His comparison of perceiving his wife the same way he perceives God, I mean, I think they probably are on par just because, like, he's building, like, a theory of mind of how his wife behaves, but then you could also build a theory of mind of how God behaves.
Only in the sense that I would say maybe that it's personal, like we believe God to be personal, so there's
Well, so is your wife.
Yes, that's my point. That only in that sense is the analogy more coherent, I think, rather than like a physical presence, which is what I was trying to say. But of course, when I say her presence, I mean more than physical, like a physical presence, right? There's a difference. If I close my eyes, if I know my wife's there, and it's like one of my worst days of the year, she's not saying anything, she's not making a noise, whatever. I know, like intellectually, she's there, right? But I have my eyes closed or whatever. I guess if you're in bad enough situation, you may not open your eyes for 5 minutes in life. Who knows what's going on? But what I mean is her presence, which is transcendent all that. But I don't mean it as in like that justifies the belief in the sensus divinitatis. I don't think it does at all. All right, it's just the experience of it is somewhat analogous to that sort of personal quality.
Do you believe in ghosts?
Say it again.
Do you believe in ghosts? Because it would seem that a ghost would just be that conceptualization without the physical presence.
Yeah, I haven't seen any ghosts. I haven't experienced them. I do feel terrified at times, like that there's some ghost-like thing out there, But I don't really like normally. If you just said, "Do I believe in ghosts?" I'd be like, I don't know. I don't normally just think I believe in them. Yeah, but it's a good question.
So would you say that we have all? So we all have this sense.
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah,
Would
I
you say
do.
that we have all experienced.
Yeah, to some degree, yeah, it's just broken and damaged, and for the believer, right? It's partly what explains why so many people believe in God or the God gene or whatever exists, and yet there's a significant enough plurality, right? That it's not just like sight, It's whatever the faculty is, it doesn't seem to work as well as sight. And of course, God is being that God is incorporeal and not we're material and so on. So there's already a bigger distance in that sense. Yeah.
Would you say that maybe atheists have attributed whatever that sense is to maybe something else?
Yeah.
As well, because obviously,
yes.
If we haven't attributed it to God, then
yeah.
If we
I mean, I can only speak since it's a purely personal perception thing. Mm-hmm. So all I can say is for me, yes. I can say that for you because I honestly really don't know what your experience is like. For me, it felt like when I looked back on my non-belief, it felt more like there were things already before that. I mean, obviously I pondered the question of God. I remember going to the golf course behind our house once, and I was like trying to communicate with extraterrestrials just without speaking. I'm on the golf course and I'm just walking in and I'm like, there's got to be something out there, And if they're way ahead of us, way more advanced, I didn't know about the Fermi paradox thing, but at the time, but I was like, there's got to be something, and they probably can. And I hadn't even seen a rival yet, so I just was trying to like telepathically communicate. Thinking, well, if they're there, they can. So, yeah, I mean, there were things I was doing that I wouldn't tell anybody. I never told anybody that. But I did stuff like that to just kind of test, is there really something out there? And so yeah, that's the way it felt like. I mean, the idea that it's like a pure analogy. That's it, not an argument for it. But like when you are in a dream and someone's talking to you in your dream, but then when you like get woken up and you realize they've been talking to you in the room, my wife's talking to me, and she somehow like her voice came into the dream, which by the way is one of the absolute coolest things ever, that idea. But it's like you wake up, but you wake up to the real voice. That's sort of what it felt like by experience. But yeah, the sensus divinitatis, you can look it up. It's obviously a very serious philosophical idea, which I don't think would have been convincing at all to me when I was a non-believer. Okay, so I would not, if you don't believe, I wouldn't. I can only tell you that that's the way believers, I think, do experience some of their sense of confidence about the reality of God. I think is through the sensus divinitatis. Anyway, I've got factors. These are the things I wrote down in the car. Factors, how I understood conversion, truths, things I started to think were true, and then what happened after that. And I think I can do this fairly short. So, some factors. I definitely remember feeling for the very first time, though very skeptical, an openness to the idea that the possibility of God. Like I remember thinking, I feel more open to this than I've ever been. But I was I was still months away from thinking I would actually believe in God. So that was one big thing, was I felt a sense like my will was a little bit more open than it had been. And again, I was only like 19, so I mean, it wasn't like I'd lived a huge, long life. But long enough to know. Reading the Bible was a factor. Even though I thought it was crazy when I first read it in like Genesis, when I first read a gospel, I was actually more interested in it. Because keep in mind, other than the generic story of Jesus, I never knew anything about these specific stories. And I was very intrigued by it. The Christians I met, I really liked them. They weren't arrogant. They were honest. And then I remember I did a paper on evolution, and my goal was to show that Christians are nuts. That was the goal of the paper at the academy. And the interesting thing was that I have no idea what these books were. I went to the library and got some books on evolution and started reading them. And I noticed that every book, and again, I don't know who wrote these. I don't know anything about them. Other than that, they were always insulting Genesis or Christianity in the book. And I remembered that after seeing it a few times, it bothered me. I was like, I just want to know the science. Like, I could care less about the Bible or the Christian sort of stuff. Like, just give me the facts. And it seemed like they married their view of science to their anti-religious view. And that left a huge impression on me. Because I was like, why couldn't you just not care about religion and then just do the science? Yeah. These things had a huge impact on me at the time. Because it made me feel more doubtful. Not like I was giving up on evolution per se, but it made me more doubtful that science was always free of bias. And that was the first time I'd ever really considered it. And I thought, that wasn't good. But it did. But again, it's not like I was like coming to the conclusion evolution didn't happen or something. And it just cast doubts. All right. So the meaning of conversion, number 2. What did I understand conversion? One, and this is probably from reading the Bible at the time, in just a very short amount of time, and probably from my roommate explaining it, but I don't really remember. I just remember this distinction. That I knew there was a difference between belief in God and believing God. So like, I believe Donald Trump exists. That's not the same thing as saying, I believe Donald Trump. Like, we know, even though it's the same word, we know that those two statements mean very different things. I believe that so-and-so exists. I believe them. Right? The second thing is trust. In Greek, like in English, we have a separate word like trust, which sounds a little bit more personal and more important and so on. And then we have another word, faith. Yeah, right? But in Greek, there's not all these words. There's one word. And that's the word that does the work of all these things. Because they're all inextricably related. Trust, belief, faith actually are all related. Even though faith often gets separated, it's same basic idea. Again, different connotations, some stronger than others, and so on. You can be reckless in your belief, clearly. Just faith can be reckless. But that differentiation mattered a lot. Oh, I remember what it was. It was a verse in James. It says that you believe in God. Great. The demons believe in God, or something like that, from James. And I remember that distinction. Like, just believing God exists does not impress him. And so that was one sort of, like, conversion meant you actually trusted him, not just believe he existed. And I thought it was all about believing he existed. And I was realizing in a short amount of time, salvation in the Christian sense does not happen for people who believe God exists. The vast majority of people Jesus spoke to who opposed him were not atheists. They were all religious people who believed God existed, who believed that they were honoring God. But the record of the Gospels is they didn't really know God. And, like, personally, they did not know him as their father, and they didn't trust him. So there was a difference there. And so I knew conversion meant more than just, like, believing God existed, and that became less important, I guess, for me. Even though you're not going to trust God if you don't believe he exists. Yeah.
Since it's been brought up, what's your opinion on the morality of eternal conscious torment in hell?
Yeah, on the morality of it or the reality of it? Morality. Yeah, I mean, I hold
the reality, perhaps.
Yeah, and the reality.
Is that a thing?
Yeah, it's a much bigger thing now in the social media world. It's not really been a big debate through most of traditional Christianity. There have been people who've had different views, of course. There have been every view across church history, but probably not a very common view in most of church history till social media. So, but I think the Bible teaches it, and I think that it sort of explains what the basis of the morality of it, which is the value of a life is infinite. I think that's the sort of the way I understand it. So sin, in other words, the sin we do has an infinite price tag on it, which is why the punishment is eternal.
Okay, so you believe in punitive justice then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think retributive justice is part of the gospel. Yeah, part of the Gospels and stuff.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Do you agree with it?
And Revelation, if you've never read it.
Do you personally agree with it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I usually agree with what the Bible says.
Okay.
Yeah.
Usually.
But I do think a lot. I was joking. I do. But I will tell you. I will tell you this without question, that I never feel like I have to pretend to believe. Like if I read something in the Bible and I think this just doesn't seem right to me, I never feel the burden to pretend that I get it,
Gotcha.
or that I like it. And
You
I
like the idea of that.
right, or I will say, hey, I'm not sure what I really make of this. So I do that all the time. And I'm trying to understand, what is really going on? What does this mean? Why is it like this? And obviously I've thought about that for quite a while. And yes, I do think the idea of hell ultimately is good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I
What do
mean,
you think about?
I think it should be clear. Either my answer should be I don't understand it, right? Or it's obviously I'll think it's good because
Because there are Christians who don't believe in that.
yeah, for sure.
Like Jehovah's Witness, for example.
Yeah.
Would you consider yourself more sort of a fundamentalist in that aspect, or like just like you interpreted it already?
What was the first option?
Fundamentalist.
I would just say a traditionalist. I mean, I read the church fathers. When I read Clement or Ignatius or Polycarp or whatever, I feel like I agree with them just like I agree with Paul or Matthew or John. So I would just see it that way. Yeah.
I guess just an idea of traditionalism versus whatever there is. How do you reconcile even then that in the history of the church there's been a lot of disagreement on what this quote-unquote doctrine would be, because the corpus of the Bible is very well started because a lot of people want to interpret it in different ways. I mean, one of my favorite examples to bring up is that in the Orthodox doctrine, if you are not baptized, you go to hell, no matter what, even if you believe in anything. If you are not baptized, you are supposed to get baptized exactly 30 days early because it's when Jesus was baptized. You just go to hell.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was just interesting to me because we're talking about the idea that, if you're a really good person who basically follows all the morals of the Bible, but don't actually believe you go to hell, which again, the Catholic Church doesn't really agree with that, and that's one of the most traditional bodies of the church that still exists. Maybe
Yes.
the oldest one.
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to that, of course, but keep in mind my conversion when I came into Christianity, it was like a Christianity I didn't feel like I quite fully, like I had a view of Christianity and then I was actually reading the text thinking, like I could already see a bunch of stuff I had heard about Christianity was just flat wrong. So one of my interests in doing like narrative criticism now, even decades later, and doing classics, is because it's just how to read, try to read it well. And you'd be surprised how much people misread, even at the scholarly level, misread things because they're just not reading carefully.
So do you think that there are the exact interpretations of the Bible possible?
No, I think there's obviously places there that are open to different interpretations that are not totally clear. I grant that, because Christians come in different ways. Not so much on the fundamental things. Most of the things that are repeated or are stated emphatically and clearly there's not a lot of, like the Nicene Creed is a lot of different Christian denominations all subscribe basically to the Nicene Creed because it's pretty basic stuff. There's not like Christian denominations usually that are like, oh, we don't believe in the resurrection, because it's obvious that that's a big part of what Christianity is. So I think on those big obvious things, yes, Christians should agree. It's not that hard to read it. And then there's other stuff that's clearly open to different interpretations. I understand, and Christians differ, and there's Christian grace within the church about people having different opinions. But I do think a lot of those they're not always as unclear as people think they are, and yet there are things that are clearly unclear. So it would have to depend. I'll give you an example at scholarly level. Are you familiar with the Messianic Secret? Ehrman's really big on this. I just did a video on this. So I think this is just sort of like a completely misguided way of understanding the framework of the Gospel of Mark, because I just think it really is totally misguided. But ultimately, I put out a video explaining what I think the structure of Mark is, what Mark's aiming at, how I would read it, and what justifies that particular reading. And somebody else would have to look at it, and either they're persuaded or they're not. Right? So I accept that. But I'm just saying, I really do think on that particular thing, Ehrman, who's a very, very sharp guy, I actually think and he is not the only one. Verede, the origin of that, I think it's truly just a misguided understanding of just how to read the basic narrative.
I mean, that's where I guess, but even beyond that, I mean, the biggest church in the world is the Catholic Church.
It is, yeah.
So.
And most of what they believe is the stuff that Baptists believe. There's famous things where they differ, but again, most of the fundamental doctrines are. I listen to Catholics all the time. I have Baptist friends. I've gone to Baptist churches. I've gone to, I don't feel like it's. I don't see the differences as being maybe so great as not on the fundamental things. They have the same basic concept of God. Their basic ideas of theology of Jesus are the same and things like that. But again, you're right. There are differences, and ultimately you'd have to specify specific things. I recognize there are differences. So another thing about the meaning of conversion, that's what we were talking about. Mm-hmm. What I understood was that it was very clear to me how totalizing it was. Like I knew on the other side that conversion meant a complete totalizing view. I wasn't just deciding, oh, now I believe in God. It was a complete life revolution. Like I knew that. And I was very resistant to the idea. For even when I converted, I remained another year at least being very, am I in for the long haul on this? So, because I knew, like, it's a whole new outlook.
What was the meaning of the going? When you say conversion, did you have to go through like an educational process? Was there a baptism?
No, just basically my own self, in my own heart and mind, committing to a belief that this is all real. It was totalizing. It wasn't just like, oh, now God exists or something like that. And it's like I was taking my boys hiking up on the mountain behind us, and we used to hike there all the time and stay overnight and stuff. And then we discovered somebody owned, it was like 10 miles of trails. And then we discovered the owner one day. Now, we weren't littering or doing anything, but the owner was there. And it completely changed our whole, we had to, are you okay if we're up here? And do you mind if we stay up here in the tent? And it totally changed the entire perspective we had of the mountain. Right? There's an owner. So if you come to the view, there's now an owner of the universe. That's totalizing. Right. It's penetrating everything.
That's I think still what I'm still wanting to hear. What was
I haven't talked about
an owner because you ran into him.
Yeah, all I'm saying is I'm trying to describe the meaning of conversion.
I understand the impact, but
yeah.
Still.
Number 3, new truths. What did I start now to think was true? This is what you're. human nature was fallen. That was the easiest thing for me to believe that I read in the Bible. Everybody's a sinner. I found, for me, you don't have to believe that, of course. I'm telling you, that seems so obviously true. Now, granted, I had a lot of brokenness in my family, in my life, a lot of high dysfunctionality. Maybe I would have thought differently in a different context. I don't know. But it felt like that was really obvious, that people knowingly do wrong. I was knowingly doing wrong all the time. I had knowingly done a ton of things wrong. Things I didn't even like that I didn't even like that I was doing them, and I was choosing to do them. So I felt like that was one of the easiest things that I was like, yep, this is true. The Bible says this. And I felt like after that I would hear people say things like they think people are fundamentally good, and I was like, they're not. They have goodness, yes. We're fallen. It's not like we don't have some goodness in us. I'm just telling you, I saw that as something I could see obviously. Now, other people have a different perspective. You were going to say?
You answered earlier when you said you think people deserve to be tortured in hell for doing bad things. Sorry, I'm a little biased.
I'm so shocked that you came back with that response.
But if your roommate had converted you earlier, you wouldn't have falsified his thing.
Yeah. Right. Like I probably would have like in whatever. I just
holding this belief that caused you to act differently.
I'm not sure if I'm following that. I'm just saying that that was before I was a Christian when I did that to him.
Right.
Yeah.
So if he had gotten to you before and converted you,
Uh-huh.
you probably wouldn't have.
I might have felt like, I don't think I want to do that to him,
So
not that I would have been. I might have still done it as a prank. I don't know.
Right. Okay.
But I would have still felt guilty, regardless. It's just it's a human moral response to feel guilt. And but anyway, the infinite value of life is that's why I think it's good, just for clarity. I think that's a great thing that life has infinite value, and everything else
I am
comes from.
horrified, honestly. So just to be full cards on the
Of course you are. Of course you are. I understand. Yeah.
So what do you think about the concept of sin flattening? So life has infinite value. So
Yeah.
like murder and stuff could be seen as have a proper punishment as infinite torture. But what about like lying or so? Because just about everyone would consider lying less than killing someone.
Yeah.
Even legally, so we do that with like fraud and perjury.
Yeah.
Way less than murder.
Yeah, like sins are of different value, right?
And-
Biblically, meaning in the Bible, not all sins are equal, right?
But
Is that what you're asking me?
they all still send you to hell for infinite torture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the ultimate sin, right, is rejecting God. That's it's not just because you've if you the book of the Revelations, you guys read it. It's the one place you get the great white throne judgment, and it says the books are open. Right, the books are open, and people are the dead are judged, and then it says that the book of life is opened, and whoever's name's not written in the book of life is eternally judged. But it's clear there's two different things. Just as a pure issue of narrative, they're judged by their works, yes, but that is not deciding whether they are in hell or not. It's a different book, which is the book of life, and it's written by whether they rejected God or not. The other books are still relevant because people's judgments vary based on the gravity of their sins, right? So in the Bible, in the Bible, people's judgments will vary because of the gravity. Sins are not all equal, right? Like they weren't under the law all equal. They aren't in the New Testament. Jesus spoke about this. It'll be more tolerable for some than others. So that seems pretty elementary to me.
So would lower sins give you less infinite torture, or that having committed less bad things give you more infinite pleasure?
Yeah, you mean so?
Do you think at one point there's annihilation?
No, I don't think it's described as annihilationism, but there are Christians who believe that, of course.
Yeah.
I don't think it's described that way. To me, it doesn't seem that way, and I think that's not the normal view but there have been Christians, to be sure, who believe that.
Okay.
And then infinite torture is probably not the way that it's described, right? Eternal judgment. Eternal means timeless, right? And judgment is judgment. The idea of infinite torture, I think that's not the language it uses, so I would not myself use that language. So human nature, that was one thing. that people that I thought that was easy to believe. I thought that was true. Biblical prophecy. I'd never even heard of that, so that really intrigued me. And I remember reading in Daniel 9 that there were 400 and whatever, it says 490 years, but it's really 483 years till the Messiah. And I remember looking at that very closely and thinking, even if I'm slightly wrong on this time frame, okay, it's really close. Like the decree to build the temple is in the middle of the 5th century. See, have a good night. Is in the middle of the 5th century, and the Jesus came, at the beginning of the whatever, around 30 or whatever, 0 to 30. So on any math, that's remarkably close. That really struck me that the years were that close. Now, there's controversy about how to read Daniel, of course, Daniel 9. But I'm just telling you, that was something that really, I'm telling you what my story was. That had a huge impact on me, that something would be that precise. And of course, there were other prophecies about the Messiah being born in Bethlehem, the Messiah being a descendant of David, and certain things about that the Messiah would do. And either the story of Jesus was, sort of concocted to match it, which is a common view, or he really fulfilled it. I think those are the two options, because he did too many things written about him match it. So either it was concocted to match it, or he really did it, or maybe there's some kind of middle ground. I don't know.
And how do you come down on one side or the other?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's a good question. But the 490 years was one way for me to feel like I could see that. That was not, Jesus lived at a certain time in history. He can't arrange when he was born. Nobody really disputes when he lived. And so the math, that was something that was not just matchable in the sense that you got too many other things going on, for him to become super famous, but then also happen to be, I thought that was too much. The other thing was John the Baptizer. Sorry.
He couldn't arrange when he was born?
Yeah, right, yeah. The other thing, I know, I'm just trying to say, nobody really disputes roughly when he was born,
So you disagree with Bart Ehrman and other people's interpretation that the Son of Man in Daniel isn't Jesus?
So Daniel 9 is not referring to the Son of Man, right? That's in Daniel 7.
I'm sorry, I think
yeah. The Daniel 9 says unto Messiah. So yeah, a Mashiach in Hebrew. So that one seems pretty clear to me. But there are different interpretations, and you can, you're welcome. I invite you to go look at them, of course. And I'll tell you what often happens. People try to gravitate to the interpretation that fits what they already believe. So I would be careful about that. Yeah.
I mean, in my opinion, middle ground definitely exists. I mean, when we think about other religions, they say, Greek mythology to be on common ground. We know the Trojan War happened. We have the accruals from the era of Pergamon that they were Greek invaders there.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean Athena descended down from the heavens to fight the Greeks with a fight.
Yeah.
No, Mount Olympus exists. That doesn't mean that God set up.
Yes.
Set up. Oh, I'm sorry, diary.
No, but of course you're right. Of course you're right.
So that's what I'm saying. Create narratives and myths to explain the world around us. Some of them can be true, some of them can be wrong. I'm not saying this is fatalist in either way, but I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
This is not a fatalist argument. Doesn't mean either way. It just exists. Means that we experience something in the world and we create a story to interpret it. I mean, that's what science is too. At the end of the day, we observe nature and then try to explain the nature.
Sure. Again, I'm telling you what at the time.
Yeah.
I'm not giving you like an argument, the best reasons to believe in Christianity right now. I'm giving you an argument of what I thought when I was 19 and why these things struck me. And some of them I would say for sure I would still defend sort of as important. The story of John the Baptizer, the fact that there was a forerunner was that really struck me. That the Messiah was not going to come alone but as a pair. So that really, there's a couple prophets, Isaiah and Malachi, that refer to a forerunner. And the Jews had different ways of looking at it, for sure, if you look in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But definitely there's a view of a forerunner. We've interviewed a local rabbi for the podcast. It's very interesting to talk to him about Messianism and how they view the Messiah. It's quite interesting. And I usually check my ideas of reading the Old Testament against him. So I think that's real important to kind of see how they view their own book. But that was interesting. The famous rabbi Levi Sabbatai, you know who this guy is? He declared himself the Messiah in like 1660 or something, and he was only like in his early 20s. But he got quite a huge following in Turkey. And then he knew he needed a forerunner. So like 7 years later, he recruited a forerunner. Doesn't work that way. The guy's supposed to come ahead of you. But anyway, But I always thought that was again, it shows you that that within Judaism, that was their view, and of course John the Baptist is validated historically, outside of the Gospels. So that kind of, those sort of, again, that's broad history, but those things impacted me. Like, hey, that lines up actually, and there's you can't cook being famous. Do you understand that? Like, being famous is hard. A lot of people want to be famous and never become famous. It's not easy to get into Josephus and so on. Like, it's so I would just say the fact that these people are even loosely, even on an Ehrman view, he believes John the Baptist existed, or James McGrath has just released a book on John the Baptizer, and Joel Marcus has written one. So I'm very intrigued by that aspect of it, that all the gospel writers are emphatic about John's role being crucial to the credibility of the message. And so anyway, but that did strike me at the time. And then another thing was Israel, the very country, the very people of Israel. That left an impression on me. And again, I was just, when I'm 19, I'm just saying, I didn't ever really think about Israel, and it was just unique to hear sort of for the first time, and contemplate these people. Had a unique conception of God. They didn't have any image in their temple. The only temple, in the ancient world, other than the Vestal Virgins, that didn't have an image of its God, and it was different. And their law, their national narrative. I mean, we have Hammurabi's Code, but there's no Exodus narrative behind Hammurabi's Code. So there's a lot of stuff that's unique to Israel. I challenge you to find any people who have any history that is remotely parallel to theirs. That struck me. And the fact that they're still, of course, managed to be at the center of world history for being far out of proportion to their size. It's not like the Greeks have been at the center of everything, even though they were a very important people historically. So that left a big impression on me. I'm just telling you. I'm not telling you to be convinced by it. I'm telling you that had a huge sort of maybe there is some credibility here to this biblical account. The story of Christian salvation struck me as being very plausible. That God, if God exists, he's obviously just, or I assume he's just, and yet he loves people. So how do you square that circle? How do you untie that Gordian knot? Because we deserve punishment for having done wrong. And or justice, whatever you think justice is, there needs to be justice. We all want justice. Who doesn't want justice? So, and yet somehow there's supposed to be mercy. And how would that all work out? And I found the Christian idea of the cross to be obviously unique. There's nothing like it. There's no other salvation like it in any religion. I mean, truly nothing like it. And so that really struck me as being both plausible, appealing, and unique. And then the idea of God as sort of the accounting for the existence of the universe. This is probably to your biggest point. Had a huge impact on me at the time. To me, it was just a mystery. The universe is a mystery. I didn't deny the Big Bang. I still don't deny the Big Bang. But the Big Bang isn't the accounting of the existence of the universe, as you know. Why something exists versus nothing. Aaron Wall is Aaron Wall. He's a physicist from Cambridge University. He's also a Christian, but I rely on him for all my physics. He's got a great article he has a blog called Undivided Looking, and he has a great article on the various theories of the beginning. Is it an absolute beginning, or is it that something exists prior? And he delves into the physics, which I can only understand half of. And his conclusion is that probably there was an absolute beginning, but there's no way to, we cannot really say that. But his inclination is to think, yeah, there probably was. But that's just his view, I'm not claiming that's the view of physics or anything. Anyway, but yeah, Meaning, I found God suddenly seemed a lot more satisfying as sort of an explanation of the universe than the idea had prior to that. But it was nothing more, Bob, than just clearly God would account for it. I mean, a creator would account for it. That I could see, and the alternative was we.
Is I don't know an uncomfortable position?
Yeah, I don't think it was like uncomfortable as in like I'd never pondered, because I wouldn't have claimed I knew. But for some reason, the
Now you know.
huh?
But now you know.
Yeah. It wasn't that I just felt like, oh, I know this for sure. I'm just saying that the idea was more obviously a solution that was satisfying to me. That's all I could say. It wasn't like I just knew then, no, God exists now.
Have you read any Dr. Daniel Linford?
Who?
Dr. Linford?
Mm-mm.
He's a PhD philosopher whose like thesis was on like cosmology. Like he's a philosophy of physics.
Yeah.
But he's been
I'd like
on
to get his
manuscript
name
recently.
before, if you,
Yeah,
I can get it before I leave. Yeah, I'd really like to
show it
get
you
that.
later. It's do you know Joe Schmidt, Majesty of Reason?
Yeah.
He's on there.
Oh, he is. Okay, I'll go.
And
Great.
like Skydive Film.
Oh, okay, all right. I'll find them then easily. Yeah, great. Thanks for that. There's so much. You guys have there's so many more resources, and good resources. I'm like, truly, if you're interested in the debates, you have real atheology. Those guys are razor sharp. Now it's very philosophical, but they are really sharp. And the best thing about them is you can get an avenue into the philosophers who are producing, like Paul Draper and Schellenberger, and like they're or the guy who's from Australia. Oppie, yeah. Like you get to world-class philosophers that are engaged in these things. And I mean, ultimately, the last thing I was going to say is Jesus, the story of Jesus, just reading about him and so on was hugely influential. All I can say is all those things I started seeing as being either true or I'm much more open to them being true than I've ever been. That's the way it felt. And I converted. Like I made a commitment. I felt a guilt about sin, a fear about death, and all that stuff for sure. And a psychological dissatisfaction in just being an agnostic all the time or an atheist or whatever. And so like all those psychological, emotional things I know were a huge part of all that. I'm just saying I was like aware that I was committing to something that I started praying privately. I didn't tell anybody. And I was like, God, I'm Bill. Like I was so weird. I cannot tell you how weird that was to pray because I just never prayed. And I was like, but you're gonna have to convince me you're there because there's no way I'm gonna believe in you unless you show me something. And but I was sort of like attracted enough, I guess, to the idea, or open enough to being true that I was like, I think I want to be a part of this, or whatever. And if you had just asked me, do you believe in God? I would have said, yeah, I think I do now. But I would not have been like, I'm totally confident I know God is real. I would not have said that. I just would have said, I started to feel like it seemed like it was more realistic that he was. And it never felt like that.
I'm wondering how much, this is quite often the way I view it, is that it becomes so much part of your personal identity, belief.
Yep.
It gives you an ID card, and it quite often gives you entree to a community. It's a country club membership.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how much of that affected the psychology.
Yep.
Because I'm still waiting for
it. Did.
I'm waiting for good reasons. I'm waiting for for the epistemology. I find is very, very sketchy here.
Yeah.
So
understandably,
my suspicion is that the psychology, and clearly you're comfortable with that. And
I'm just telling you what happened.
Right.
Whether I don't think it's impressive. I'm just telling you that's what happened.
But comfortable enough that you're a teacher, you're a parent, you're a grandparent. And for me, as a teacher and a parent, I'm a grandparent yet.
Yeah.
It's really important that I communicate to my students what is true or likely true.
Yeah.
And this is for my students as well as my children.
Yeah.
And I find it, unethical. I would be unethical if I was teaching my students things that presenting as truth, from a position of authority, to students who look at me as an authority.
Yeah.
If I was presenting something as true that I couldn't know to be true.
Yeah. I think the way I would say it is that
you're doing that, right? You're a teacher, you're a parent, you're a grandparent. I'm assuming that you're teaching this stuff to your children.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not teaching my mind of when I was 19,
right.
But I've moved on a little bit.
You're teaching them to believe, these things.
Yeah, for sure.
Well,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
to be true now, so it lines up.
What?
You know it to be true now.
He thinks
like
it's
you,
true,
you,
right?
you were thinking and you were kind of not 100% sure at the time when you were 19, but now
Yeah.
you've got that spiritual sense that you were describing. You've experienced.
Yeah, I have much higher confidence. Within a year or two, I felt by that point quite confident, and have never really had serious doubts. Though I ponder it once in a while, of course. Though I would never claim that you don't claim knowledge of like 100% of anything. Let me say this. If you had asked me at the time, sort of like, why do you think now God is real? I would have said something like, well, it's like, I don't think I did this, but something like this. I can't remember what I would have said, what my exact analogy would be, or my referent. But I would have been like, well, if you found the David, in the sea, or the Riachi brothers, these are famous sculptures from Greece. You would just intuit, you would infer that there was some creator for them because they exist and the nature of their existence. And that's what it felt like. It felt like I was looking at the universe and the nature of it, and the inference to God felt a lot more plausible than it did up until then. That's what I mean by saying it felt like I was a lot more open to this idea. Belief in God is ultimately an inference, other than the sensus divinitatis. It's an inference. That's all the arguments are inferential. They're a posteriori. The good arguments, the best arguments. And so, whether like when I went into Greek philosophy and was reading Aristotle, I was the benefit to that. Hold on, the benefit to that right after that, because I went home. I was not part of those people's lives. I went home and I lived among all my old friends and family and stuff. And there not much of a ticket at that point. And I started doing some, classics and getting introduced to the Greek philosophers. And I was like, wait, Xenophanes is criticizing the myths. Xenophanes realizes God is one. That was, I didn't know that there were Greek philosophers who had these ideas about God, and that they had developed arguments for God and reasons for why that had the biggest impact of me feeling like, okay, this wasn't just my background, this wasn't just one experience, this was something that was, the classical world is very, very foreign to our modern Christian Western, world. And so that had a huge, sort of coming in behind, and me starting to think a lot more clearly about the question of God, and why people have thought what the evidence, what I would call evidence, or the arguments that lead people to God, why they're sophisticated, and why people feel a higher level of confidence when they ponder those arguments. And again, Aristotle had nothing to do with me in terms of his personal life, how he was, his life was not a Christian life. And yet I was being very persuaded by him and Plato in their writings to their outlook on a number of things philosophically. So that had a huge impact on me as far as sort of coming in and again, if I were sitting here tonight giving you what I think are the better arguments, the first way argument of Aquinas or the contingency argument or these various things, I think in the end they're all still inferential. And they all ultimately come down to, here's a universe, we know something about it, what best explains it and everything else in it, and my beliefs are then going to inform that. I think I think it's clear there's an immaterial layer to reality, and that's going to influence my inferences. Like God's going to seem more plausible to me. All right. So, what were you going to say now?
No,
I don't have anything to add.
But yeah, the immaterial thing.
Yeah.
That's a whole plane.
No, right. Like to me, it seems obvious that there's an immaterial. But if someone else doesn't believe that, I can understand why. From my view, it's going to be harder work to get toward God, whereas I've already got the first rung of the ladder, right? Like there's an immaterial layer to reality that seems obvious to me.
Claim, right? The question is how do you substantiate?
Yeah, it seems obvious to me through direct perception. Like morality seems transcendent to me, so it's.
We could have a whole
discussion
on that because I don't necessarily
You don't believe there's an immaterial layer of reality.
Correct.
Yeah, you would hardly be the only person who holds that view. For me, obviously I've talked to gazillion conversations about this. Why am I so confident that I perceive? The answer is I perceive it, of course. But I could try. Like I've tried to like mathematics as well. Is also like purely projection of the head. Is that right? Like a sphere in a basketball is only in the head. It's not in the actual basketball.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah.
What's that?
For me, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to ask in regard to like philosophy of mind. Like, would you align more with property dualism or substance dualism? Maybe substance
It always comes back to this.
I'm sorry.
Ask me a question that the classical philosophers dealt with. Am I a nominalist? Is that what you're asking me?
No. So like, is your view?
I'm not as big of an analytic philosopher.
No, I got you. That's perfectly fine. So for like philosophy of mind, like, do you find that? Because I'm a property dualist, but what I mean by that is like the consciousness, like the brain is all physical.
Yeah.
But then consciousness.
Oh, I see what
is
you're asking.
emergent
So
property.
substantive, obviously. I guess I'm.
Yeah.
substantive,
Okay.
so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I take it.
Yeah, I really think there's an objective world out there. I think there's a
Okay.
past and things which we can't demonstrate to be true.
I would agree.
We
that
believe in
I'm a fallibilist.
if you believe in the past, right? Are you familiar with what's called properly basic beliefs?
Yeah.
That's a very good starting point. Like 3 things I'd advise people to do: look up what the word knowledge means. Right? Knowledge means justified belief in the philosophical world. So the best resource for philosophy is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, but it's online.
Another one, the ISP.
ISP is very good. It's probably a little more accessible. But the Stanford is kind of the prestigious one. So the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is an online thing. You can go look up God. You can go look up knowledge. You can go look up whatever. And I do not care what you, I mean, ultimately where you go with your beliefs. That's I have no control over that. I'm just telling you, get educated. Like you have to be able to learn the language that people have debated since the classical world, these topics. Just like it's no point in criticizing Christianity for things it doesn't believe. You can criticize hell because that's a traditional Christian belief. Like you absolutely can attack that. And Christians would be crazy if they said they've just been like, oh yeah, I have no problem with that. Oh yeah, I've never pondered that. Or hey, I've never really pondered that. My own view is that people, whatever. I would just say, I highly recommend you get, make sure you watch the movie you're critiquing. And that's true philosophically as well as, because a lot of people have like one side of how they view reality, and they're not familiar with like the broader
I grew up
debates.
fundamentalist Baptist, so my view of hell is a little
Well,
bit
I meant like there's like different. The academy is so divided.
Mm-hmm.
The classical world wasn't like this. Everybody was they were very holistic. They were philosophers, right? Aristotle was a biologist / physicist / philosopher. Proto. Like the very fact that people still think Aquinas' argument is about moving, about motion, right? Because they don't know that the word meant change as well as motion. Like that's so elementary, and yet Richard Dawkins, he wrote a whole book on it. So, like you want to get educated enough so you know what you're critiquing or what you disagree with, and so on. I guess that would be my advice to everybody.
Because like greatness and like Anselm is like historically misunderstood as well.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. What is greatness? The good news is I'm a nobody, and I'm not God. And if God exists, if He does exist, then you don't have to worry about me, right? Like it's not between me and you. Yeah.
I suppose the final question for the nobody. Do you have any moral disagreements with anything God may have done throughout the Bible?
Good question. Yes, and I don't claim to have resolved them all.
Okay, just checking.
Absolutely, yeah. But some of them I do feel I think I understand a lot better, and other ones I don't. Just like I would say there's contradictions, like the genealogies don't agree, and the explanations for them are not adequate, and I feel no burden to pretend they are.
Okay.
Yeah. So in the same way that, but there's a lot of time. I'll say the same thing. People will say, "Oh, well, this is what happened at the conquest," and I'm like, maybe you ought to go back and read that about 20 more times.
So, I guess an interesting question that follows on with that. You said that you have disagreements, and then you talked about like understanding. So, do you think if you understood the situation fully, you would not disagree?
Yeah, that's what and the reason that I hold that view is because, like initially, I would have said that and done that. I would have just said, well, I'll understand it someday. But I've now had decades of thinking, of having a problem with something and then realizing I wasn't even reading it. And realizing, oh, well, I was not being very fair to what was actually written. So that has humbled me. The Bible's a very big book. It takes a while to understand it. But at the same time, I have no problem with there just being things that I'm like, that clearly seems wrong. And I'm very happy to be wrong about hell. I think the way I understand it, it makes sense to me. But, like if John 3:16 is right.
How would you know if you were wrong?
How would I know?
Yeah.
I won't know.
Okay.
Until the day.
I have a question.
But what I mean is that I have a way of understanding it that I think is derived from Scripture that has to do with infinite goodness, the infinite value of life, which is a very good idea, I think. And it all comes out from that. And if my thinking proves to be flawed in that, or I've misread Scripture, I'm happy to be corrected by.
I come from more of a pseudo-Calvinist interpretation of it,
Yeah.
so it's just God being
If I'm-
torturing people for something.
Yeah, no.
They're just making sure.
Yeah, so
I forget not everyone believes.
Yeah, no. I mean the biblical view, right? That God loved the world. I take it at face value.
Well, Calvinists think he loved the world. It's just,
Yeah.
only love part of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but so I really do believe God loves everybody.
Yeah.
And
What percentage, by the
nor
way,
do
are in
I
hell?
worry about that.
What percentage of the people that have
Good
lived
question.
in hell?
Have no idea.
Okay.
I'll
I think
say.
it's like less or greater than half.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you know what Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount.
Yes.
That wide is the gate,
Mm-hmm.
and broad is the way
Well, he
that
doesn't
leads
actually talk about that.
to
It's
destruction,
interpreted.
and many there be that find it,
Mm-hmm.
and narrow is the gate, and straight is the road that leads to eternal life, and few.
So, interesting question. You talked about being on the golf course. And,
Who?
You talked about, as a kid, being on the golf course and trying to talk to aliens in your
Yeah.
Now, you know about the
I'd
Fermi
never have
paradox.
told anybody that.
What? You know about the Fermi paradox. Do you think that there's a good chance that alien life is out there, or are we the only ones?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been very open to it, and but the Fermi paradox I think, is pretty strong. Like, it's sort of like time travel. Like time travel, like if we're really traveling in time, then if people can travel backwards, they're doing a really good job of hiding themselves for millions and millions and millions of years. So I just am like, apparently we can't travel in time. That seems kind of obvious to me.
So the interesting question that leads on from that, though, is does God love them too?
If they are there,
Yeah.
like I believe the universe, He created it for a reason.
Would they look like us?
I have no, I don't have no. The Bible says nothing about it. I have no idea. So but I'm totally open to it. I think He made the universe for a reason. I don't think this creation is the end of it, and so on. Why would the Creator stop creating? And if He created a bunch of other stuff, I look forward to hearing what it's about. Like, I truly think, like, the one thing about life, for me personally, life is not boring. Not normally. Life has like infinite variety. Just think of music. Just think musically. It just has infinite melodies. And so I take great courage and encouragement from that. Like, I love, if in fact this is a product of God, I love that. Like, that it has that kind of infinite variety and good. I love the fact that Jesus' first miracle was to go and provide a bunch of wine for people. Because everybody thinks God's a killjoy, and it's like, here He is, His first miracle, like, gives them a spread of wine.
So that's a good, because that's actually a question that I think I've asked you and you never answered, which is, as I was talking about Thomas Paine, and how Thomas Paine essentially rejected all the miracles of Christ.
Yep.
Paine's view of
Yeah.
in Age of Reason Part 2
Yep.
was,
Yep.
let's just ignore all that stuff. He was still a deist,
Yep.
but he thought all that supernatural stuff was nonsense.
Yep.
And you said that Paine had a bias, and you didn't think that he could rule out the supernatural. And my question to you was, how do you rule it in?
Yeah.
What can you point to as your best example of something supernatural?
Yeah.
And how do you make the connection that this is indeed something supernatural as opposed to there's some other cause?
Yeah. So I said I believe there's an immaterial layer of reality, right? Meaning that to me, morality, I mean to reality. So like morality, mathematics, logic, and so on. Consciousness I'd include in that. So I think of humans as being, in the biblical sense, right? That's the very question he was asking me. So it's not like that far of a jump to what you're calling supernatural. I mean that lays somewhat of a groundwork for that. But now you're asking me specifically, like, what's the best evidence for a specific supernatural event? And I would say that the creation of the universe. Like I see the universe as itself no more supernatural.
Let's take Christ, the miracle you referred to. Turning water into wine.
Yeah, I don't think there's great historical evidence for that.
Okay.
There isn't great history. It's one event in one gospel. I don't think there's great historical evidence. I believe it, but I believe it. I believe it because I believe that.
If you give yourself permission to believe something without good evidence, that creates a heuristic in your mind. To be honest with you, it doesn't matter whether or not water is turned into wine. But my concern is that that gives you permission to believe other things without good evidence.
Yeah. So obviously,
that circle.
Yeah. Well,
because you're teaching this to people, right? You're teaching this to students. You're teaching this to your children and to your grandchildren.
Yeah. If it were one story, Bob, that was floating out there, in the middle of nothing, I wouldn't believe it. But it's not.
Resurrection also falls under the same. That's why I was so surprised you listened.
Wait.
The resurrection almost last, or Jesus last. The things that convinced you.
Because it was
for most Christians, this is the most.
I saved him last because he's the exclamation point.
Okay, well, but
he was last because he was best.
This is the most important miracle. This is the time it came last time.
Yeah.
My dad will respond to you. He accidentally sent it to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're talking about the resurrection. Now, obviously, so anytime we're talking about history, right? These are historical questions. So how do we decide what historically happened? And obviously, that's just a category of how do we decide what historically happened. The problem is, so if you're normally just deciding, did this event in Caesar's Gallic Wars happen, right? That's what you're doing as a classicist.
Again, this is the pain argument, though. We know that these wars occurred.
Yeah.
Right. And historians write about them, and there's historians, essentially the gospel writers.
No.
Again, these are stories.
No, let me finish.
So there's a difference between story and history, but I'm willing to accept that the stories about where Jesus went and who he talked to, those, I can accept that. And Payne was willing to give you all that.
Yeah.
It's the supernatural stuff.
Yeah, I got it. So, first of all, I don't think
that's the most important thing, isn't it?
It is the most important thing. Yeah, you mean the resurrection? Yeah, of course. But you were asking me.
For a week or for months.
Yeah, I mean, you were first asking me about what you thought I thought was like sort of proof of some supernatural event, and I said the creation of the universe and creation of us, which I really do think is. That's kind
of answering a mystery with a mystery, right?
Well,
you are smuggling in just by saying creation. You're smuggling in something. You're claiming to know something you don't know.
Sure.
To answer something
I'm saying
you
that,
also don't know.
right. I'm saying that the universe. I'll say the universe, and
the existence of the universe.
Yeah, the universe and its nature, and humanity. I think of humanity as much greater than the universe. Humans are, and I think of them as.
Part of the universe. That seems to be a tautology.
What I mean is, like, it's obvious that I'm superior to the sun. I know the sun's there. It doesn't know I'm here. It seems obvious to me that I'm superior. Don't get me wrong. The sun is very important. I'm not saying it's not important, but I think a human being is more important than the sun. Like, I see that as I mean by more important, I mean superior even. Like, we're as a being in the universe, our existence is higher than the sun's.
I might ask how you know the sun doesn't know you're here.
Yeah. Well, I don't feel like there's any reason. There's no evidence that there's just no evidence.
Gravitationally, the sun knows you're here.
I assume you. Just for clarity, I'm pretty sure you don't actually think that.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Not necessarily.
Okay. I just want to be clear. I didn't think you actually thought it either. So I did provide that. Now you're asking a separate thing, right? So granting that I really do think, just from the existence of the universe and humanity, is like there's a demonstration of God's supernatural power, every day. Like in the Bible, the the existence of the universe is like music, right? Like God has to sustain it at every moment. That's the basis of the contingency argument. It's not just that it was created at one time. It's that it exists every moment is the miracle, and that's the work of the contingency argument, is that God has to hold it in its existence at every instant. So I see that as, that's my most obvious sort of thing. But if you're asking now in the Bible itself, now granting I already believe that. I believe God's real. I believe there's a basis for that, supernatural from the existence and nature of the universe, our existence. Now, do I believe the record of the Gospels and so on, right? In that framework, do I believe them? Well, obviously, I'm already halfway, in the sense that I already believe God exists. Now, I may reject Christianity. I might reject Islam and become Jewish or something, But obviously, I would be already halfway toward it not being as big of a hurdle for me, because I already have some foundation of that God is real and He has acted in this universe to create it and has a purpose for it, presumably. And so it's only going to be in that context that I'm going to make a judgment about those Gospels. And I would say that as far as historical events, you have the same basic criteria, the multiple attestation and the criteria of embarrassment, and the same things historians use to decide any event. And there's plenty of one-off events in Herodotus and Thucydides. But the only way as a historian you can work is to judge the general character of the work, and then do you have grounds for doubting the account?
Can you describe those? Herodotus and Thucydides?
Historians of Greek wars and so on.
Right.
Yeah. Herodotus incorporates some elements of the gods.
What claims did they make? What stories did they tell?
Yeah.
They told of curing the blind.
Yeah.
Not themselves, but they told stories of other
good point.
kings.
Yeah.
And so that's Payne's whole point, is that we don't remember. We remember Thucydides. We remember their history.
Yeah.
But we easily discount.
Yeah.
All that crazy stuff. We know
Yeah.
they were spinning yarns.
Yeah.
And my question is, how do you know that these are not just spun yarns?
Yeah. Right. So let me get to it, but let me just start again with the idea that no matter what historian you're reading from the classical world, you're going to have one-off events, which is how this started, like the wedding feast at Cana, and you're going to judge either the author is generally reliable or they're not, or either they are generally reliable but there are reasons to doubt this particular incident. Okay, so we do that all the time, where there's one-off events and we accept it based on one author's. It's not our ideal, but we do occasionally accept that.
So what you're saying is these are authors you trust, and even though these are one-off events, because you already accept the continuous and massive miracle of the universe, this small miracle of water to wine.
No, you made too many. No, because there's a whole, there's a lot in between there. But yes, his question initially was about, is there some supernatural thing and I didn't know he was asking about the Bible. I just thought he was talking about generally. So I answered that question. Then it became the one miracle. And I'm saying, well, let me just say, given that I think God exists, obviously it's going to seem a lot more potentially plausible.
Right.
Whereas if I was an atheist, I would think just completely discount all of it. I wouldn't even take it seriously at all.
On a different tack then,
Yeah.
UFO testimony on UFOs, right? Weren't there just recently some people on Capitol Hill?
Yeah.
Again, going through another round of hearing, right?
Yeah.
Could someone who believes that UFOs exist think those people are telling the truth?
Yeah.
But
they could.
Do you think they're telling the truth?
No, I'm generally a skeptic when they're just telling me. Yeah.
Right. So.
But
why?
Because
why don't you believe them?
Yeah. So now let me get to what I form a general sense of reliability about the Gospels. That's the question. And of course, the Gospels don't give you the option of having just a general sense view. The Gospels are unforgiving in this respect, that they're declaring authoritatively the truth of these events and their meaning, and they are highly consequential. So, you either they're clearly unreliable, right? Because they're just making such outrageous claims. They're either clearly unreliable, or you have to take them seriously as they are, is the way I would read that, because of the nature of their claims and the nature of their assertions of authority about what happened. Now, that doesn't mean that, like Ehrman's view, right, is going to be there was this guy named Jesus. He was a Jewish apocalyptic prophet, and so on. This is a standard critical view. But the writers were basically, either they're not to be taken seriously. They're not serious people, right? Like these claims of all the miracles and so on are not serious to someone like Ehrman. I don't think he would not view them as maybe like clinically crazy or something, but he would just say, this is not like Thucydides writing a book. He wouldn't view them like that at all, even though he thinks there's some things that are true in there. Okay, I have a different view, and my view is formed out of some of the things I mentioned, the unique aspects of the history of Israel, the accounts of their particular story, their theology, what sets them apart from the rest of ancient nations. And that was prefatory, of course, to all the stuff in the Gospels. All the theology and stuff much of it was already in place before you ever get to the Gospels. So that, to me, has historical credibility because of its uniqueness. And then its superiority. Like, the world eventually said, yep, the Jews were right. Like, most people believe in that type of God rather than like Zeus, because they saw it as obviously superior. And then you get to things like the prophecies that led specifically, some of them specifically referring to the Messiah. The very idea of a Messiah predates Jesus. The Jews still believe there's a Messiah. The Orthodox Jews still believe there's a coming Messiah. So I consider those little checks and balances that I'm not misreading this. These things are there. They were there before Jesus came. This is a question of how much does he line up with what the messianic expectations were, and then what the credibility is where you have multiple attestation, like the feeding of the 5,000 or the resurrection. The resurrection events, just from a historical point of view, right? Resurrection events don't all... The event could still be true even if there's contradictions in there. I mean, most of the details are fairly similar. They're at the tomb and all that kind of stuff, the women. But, like, if you ask... I knew people who'd seen, JFK shot in Dallas. You obviously give slightly different accounts, but he's still dead. So I don't think that's a big factor, that particular factor.
JFK was not laid to rest in Arlington, and then all of a sudden...
Yes, I agree. I agree, that event is totally different.
I don't care about the death of a first century Palestinian.
I was only making the case that multiple attestation applies to any event when you're reading history, and that there's multiple attestation for the reresurrection, so that would be a factor.
That's a whole...
I agree with you.
Body rising up from the dead.
I agree.
It's an entirely different level of... I would need so much more evidentiary evidence, and so would you.
You would. Yes, you would. But of course...
The bar has got to be set much, much higher.
Yeah. But I've been trying to give what are, for me, some of the things that make that bar lower. Right? Meaning I already have things behind, just before I'm deciding on the resurrection, I already accept as true. Even that other people don't, it doesn't matter. But for me...
Lowering the bar is good.
What I mean by lowering the bar is it makes it less outrageous or less implausible compared to the way I would have looked at it as an atheist. I already believe God had created the universe out of nothing. I already believe I was created...
Right, without good evidence. You make these beliefs, and again, that's my main concern, is that I don't care whether people believe in a God, because I don't think that God exists.
Right.
But I worry about that heuristic, that mental pathway that's been created, because now you're giving yourself permission to believe any number of things.
Why wouldn't you consider the universe itself evidence? I'm curious about that. Why wouldn't you consider it evidence?
What's that?
Why wouldn't you consider the universe evidence?
The universe just is.
But it's still evidence. I mean, whether like
Evidence
you can
of
have,
what?
like if you have a
You and I can both agree that the universe exists, right? We have to avoid the problem of hard solipsism.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I can't make any other claim about the universe, and I'm very happy to say that. I don't know.
I mean, like if you have a murder, let's hope there's not a murder in the room. If you have a murder in the room later tonight, and there's they seal off the room and they collect evidence, the evidence is just what's there, and then trying to explain out of that evidence what happened. The evidence is still evidence. People could arrive at different theories of what happened based on the evidence. They do all the time. They argue about it in a court of law every week. But it's still the evidence. The defense and the prosecution are using the same evidence. They're just arriving at different conclusions But so the universe is evidence, no? Yeah.
I was going to ask this earlier, but this also relates now. You said earlier that the universe has a nature. Does that play into the active as evidence? Like, what is?
Yeah, the nature of the universe is.
What do you mean by nature?
Yeah, like it's
kind of a hard materialist. So.
Yeah, so like it's contingency for one, the very existence of change, the existence of order. Are you familiar with like with
I
the?
don't think those things exist. I think those are like concepts in our head.
Do you mean
I'm
like
not to argue, just like I'm trying
yeah,
to get what you mean by
yeah.
nature.
Well, that's what I mean, and of course, like I see morality as a part of the universe, but immaterial rather than projected.
Gotcha.
So for me, that counts as part of the nature of the universe.
You said immaterial?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I missed the end real quick because my chair's squeaking.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
So in other words, I'm not a strict materialist. So I already, in my mind, I perceive things like I think of morality as being transcendent, and so that's the way I perceive it. And so to me, it counts as evidence, in the sense that it's part of the nature of the universe.
Gotcha.
But again, I'm not quite following, and it could just be I'm misunderstanding something. But evidence, you can create a different theory. You can infer something different out of the evidence, right? That's what they call inference to the best explanation. People can differ on what they think the best explanation is, but the evidence is the same evidence. The universe is evidence. It's just a question of, what is it pointing to? Yeah, it could be evidence for naturalism. Yeah.
For your analogy, it feels more like that we just found a dead body, and then you claim to, like, you see the dead body, you go, well, there's a dead body, someone must have killed this man.
Yeah.
And I feel like, generally as atheists, we go, well, we know there's a dead body. There's several different ways it's going to happen.
Yeah.
All we know is that there is a dead body right now.
That's really good. I like that. Of course, I'm claiming there's other evidence. Meaning, I'm not just claiming that there's a universe, but it has a nature. There's different aspects to the nature of the universe. So it's like you have a dead body, you have the gun, you have Kafka's gun on the nightstand.
But the problem is you're now making claim upon claim upon claim.
No,
These are
no.
you're not
Wait.
you're not-
The things I'm saying about the nature. No one's disputing the universe has a nature. Do you dispute? Do you dispute that?
I think the whole concept of nature is just in our head. I would say that.
Just for clarity, you're saying you believe there's an external world?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, I kind of have to. I process it through my head. But
Okay.
solipsism is just circular.
Let's just say he doesn't believe in an external world.
Yeah, I don't believe in like anything
Okay.
supernatural.
So let's just say that. Clearly, I'm not alone, right? I think it's pretty safe to say that I could look across history. I've read a lot of historians. I've read a lot of people through history. I don't think I'm alone when I say that the view that morality is transcendent, that's not like a minority view. So I represent a fairly large contingency of people who look at the universe a certain way and think this is sort of obviously clear. And it's okay that other people, you don't incorporate that in. I totally understand that. I'm not saying you should pretend not to. I'm just saying, for me, that's going to work as part of the evidence, the nature of the universe. Fine-tuning is something that I say is that's clear, that's scientifically demonstrable. So it seems.
I want to return to that.
Okay.
You cited a physicist.
Let me say this.
Wait, before you get down that road, can I ask?
Yeah.
Mine's on meta ethics.
No,
so I'll let you guys
listen,
handle
Bob.
that.
Bob, this is what I mean by that.
I just want to do
This is what I mean by that.
My question is,
I'm not
watch for confirmation bias.
Okay.
Watch for confirmation bias.
All right.
Because you seem to easily dismiss. Right?
No, what I'm listen.
Not dismissing it. He perceives God through a sixth sense,
Yeah.
It's built into it.
Yeah.
The
No.
fine-tuning thing,
No.
You seem to accept it
What I'm
from
saying
physicists
is,
from-
Bob, if I were at a conference with physicists and I said fine-tuning exists, would everybody rise up in revolt and say I don't know what I'm talking about? There would be disagreement among them, sure, but it's not like two physicists have thought there might be fine-tuning to the universe. I mean, Martin Rees is not a nobody that people mock because he wrote a book on fine-tuning, right? I mean, Luke Barnes and whatever the other guy is, who's the agnostic.
The danger is finding someone like that, and then because they're saying something you already believe to be true, counting that as evidence.
I totally agree. I actually not like super overwhelmed by the fine-tuning argument. I'm saying that fine-tuning, physicists many smart physicists, way beyond my capacity, have argued, have written books on it, and are taken very, very seriously that the universe has fine-tuning, as they assert also about the Big Bang. Okay, I can't go in there and dispute with them what they're claiming is true about the universe. I can only say, to be very specific, I can only say, if they're right about the physics of fine-tuning, okay, that is something about the nature of the universe. Is there an explanation, and does God relate to that or not? Is a live question then. And that's not me saying that. I mean, you read the physicists themselves. Martin Rees brings it up in his own book. So it's not like I've invented it for confirmation bias. I didn't come up with the idea. It's out there. The Big Bang is out there. Does it have an explanation? Is an inference out of the Big Bang reasonable to go in the direction of God? If it isn't, or people disagree on that isn't or whatever, that's totally fine. Or some people might say, I reject the Big Bang. Okay, that's totally fine. Maybe physicists reject the Big Bang. But it's not like I invented that as evidence. I'm just simply a little guy who's listening to the experts declare things about the universe. Some things I perceive about the universe, I find those way more strong. Like for me, morality is an immaterial feature in the universe. And logic is, and mathematics, things that are immaterial. But it's okay that other people disagree, but for me, those are not things like, I believed that before, even when I was an atheist, I actually wasn't a strict materialist. Drew, the atheist who does the podcast with me, is not a strict materialist at all. We interviewed a guy recently who's a pan-deist. There's lots of different views, and so I'm just saying, granting that feature, granting that that's true, then that is a part of the nature of the universe, and then that factors into how I would think about what the inference from that might be, and so therefore it comprises evidence. Now, the evidence could lead you to a view that's not God. It would still be evidence. That's the way I'm using the term evidence. I'm not trying to cook the books and say. Now, yes, when I was using the term creation, you were right. I'm using a biblical term, creation. And I understand, and that's totally fair criticism. So I switched to universe. It's totally fine. We should probably wrap it up. No?
Yes.
Well, real quick.
Yeah.
Because he's had to stand up.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
okay,
Sorry.
yeah,
Go ahead. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask.
Man, I wish I could be here in Starkville more often. This group is great.
So
Come back for sure.
Yeah,
please, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll advertise it more.
Yeah. So two kind of questions. So
Yeah.
the first one is kind of what is your meta-ethical view? Because it doesn't seem like it's divine command theory,
Yeah.
or the Catholic version of that,
Yeah.
which is natural law theory.
I'm not really committed to one. I have to say that I first of all, I do think you can form a natural view like Aristotle did.
Oh, of course,
for
yeah.
morality.
I'm a moral, naturalistic moral
Okay.
realist. Yeah. So
But,
I kind of hold to Isabella is wrote a good.
But I have a sort of problem that on the assumption God exists, on that premise,
Yeah.
then divine command theory seems like it might work the best. So I sort of remain kind of open on that question.
Yeah.
Not too critical about
Yeah,
it.
because
I'm more interested in does someone, moral transcendence is more interesting to me. Is sort of just do people perceive? I tend to think people perceive it and they maybe misunderstand what I mean by it, but whatever.
Yeah, would you kind of understand it to be, because it seems like you're equating it in a kind of Platonic forms, is that the
Yeah,
way?
yeah,
Okay.
there's a, yeah,
Gotcha,
that's pretty good.
Because I hold to a neo-Aristotelian.
Not the forms, not the forms in a plurality, but just the idea.
Just the idea of the forms existing in that
When we think something's wrong, it doesn't I don't feel like I perceive it. You all may be different, of course. I don't feel like I perceive it as in it's just in my head.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like,
it's a natural
killing a 5-year-old,
Yeah.
whatever. It feels like that's just wrong. You asked me about a biblical story. That just feels like that's just kind of obviously wrong. And by wrong, I mean it's not dependent on me and you and you and you. It feels like I don't care who you are. That's just wrong. And Drew agrees with me. Drew Morris, I
would agree.
He agrees with me. So he accepts that, and he tells me I have no basis for that. He just flat out says he says I have a problem because my moral intuition is that that's just transcendently wrong. It doesn't matter if we were 100,000 years from now on a different part of the solar system, and somebody was killing their babies.
When you say transcendent, does it matter if it's a different species?
Yeah, I guess you mean killing?
Well,
Or
no,
you
what
mean,
I'm, what I'm saying is that like,
is morality like confined to humanity, you mean?
yes,
Our hypothetical.
animals don't go to hell.
Or maybe even aliens, like, could it be?
I don't really, I mean, I'm not sure if I'm quite following, but I'm not,
saying
I
it's
don't know
correct,
about the
because, like,
morality of
okay,
aliens.
I don't think morality is transcendent, but at the same time, I have no problem with like morality being a human.
Yeah, and by the way, I really mean this as in sort of like, it's how I perceive it.
Okay, gotcha.
Like, to me, it seems wrong, not just in my own private opinion. I know lots of private opinions I have. Like, I recognize them. And I recognize belief in God is not something everybody shares. I can see that. I don't expect, like, people to have a different opinion about whether Bob's standing over there. Like, I obviously we can see those differences.
But we share that there are laws against killing 5-year-olds, which tells us, hey, we got a societal issue with killing 5-year-olds.
Yeah, we do. But I'm saying that
Where does that come
the way the way it feels subjectively is that is not really dependent on our society or any society. It doesn't feel that way. It feels like it would. It feel, huh?
What about societies that didn't have that then?
There are societies that did a lot of very awful things during not necessarily today. I mean, to look at Spartans without
Right,
going into
I
that.
was thinking
Yeah.
Spartans,
I'll-
I was thinking,
Well, yeah,
lions,
right. So everybody would, most societies, right? You're not going to find a society that like promotes murder, promotes theft, promotes deception, is like literally the opposite of the Ten Commandments. What you'll have is, just like in the Jewish society, you'll have people who generally human morality is generally very same, which is one of the reasons that the evolutionary explanation has some force. And what they'll say is, yeah, killing's wrong. However, right, there's always a but, because like every society has some exception where killing is justified. At the very least, if someone's trying to kill your child or something, like there's always these exceptions, and they vary as to what those exceptions are and what justifies them, for sure.
I would agree with you there. I personally find Platonism very, or at least Platonic form's view of things transcending very intuitively appealing.
Yes, yeah.
I'm curious if you've read any Michael Huemer. He's a big philosopher nowadays. He's a non-naturalist, believes in substance dualism, reincarnation. All that. Very interesting atheist.
I've only heard of him. Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
like sort of like Nagel, I guess he's somewhat like
kind of
Thomas
like Nagel
Yeah.
a little bit, though he differs in a few views.
Of course, they're philosophers.
Of course, yeah, they always disagree. It's interesting because what arguments would you present to someone like him who's not, who's not appealed, he already accepts those views of things transcending. He's just curious about the question regarding God, and he's fine with accepting. Even Oppie makes a caveat that kind of fine tuning is somewhat appealing, and you can give that credit to theism in regard to naturalism. But naturalism wins out in the worldview comparison.
Yeah, I
So,
mean,
how would you kind of go against that?
Yeah, my view would be, other than just having a nice cup of coffee and talking, the notion that I'm going to introduce something philosophically to somebody like him, that other people who are infinitely more qualified, literally infinite, more qualified than I am, seems absurd to me. I'd be happy to ask him about his family.
Sure.
I'm just saying, in the world of philosophy, there's the people who are professional philosophers. It's not that you can't have a conversation. It's not that you can't. It's not that you can't say this is how you understand it and so on. But I would expect in that kind of a conversation, I'm there to pick his brain and learn something.
Yeah, exactly.
And throw out ideas and let him critique mine so I can learn something. That's the way I would feel about that conversation. We should probably close, huh? Because I got to go over. I got to go visit a friend.
You're not driving back.
Hey, you guys are fantastic. I really mean this. And we now have you were great. We now have a basis for further conversation than next time.